Let's roll. This is Countercharge, your podcast for ranks, flanks, and kings of war. Join your hosts as they delve into the world of Panithor and bring you worldwide coverage of all things Kings of War.
Welcome to Countercharge. I'm Steve Tuck.
I'm Paul Collins.
And I'm Matt Croger. And you wouldn't believe it, we've managed to find two people in the world that play Ratkin Slaves, and we're going to bring you the army review that very few of you have ever wanted. Although I did hear on the Masters episodes recently that there was a player at Masters playing Ratkin Slaves. So who knows whether they will survive into fourth, but it's one of the only reviews we haven't done. So it is time to get it done before the sun sets on third edition. But first up, Steve, we've never had you on the show before. A famous man in the Australian scene and a good supporter of the Australian scene. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background of making it into Kings?
Yeah, sure. I probably got into wargaming relatively late. It was in probably my uni days. Had a mate drag me down to Jedco Games in Melbourne one fateful trip and bought into 6th edition Warhammer Fantasies. That was probably about 25 years ago, admittedly. But that was my into wargaming. I didn't have anything prior to that. Kind of spent all my hard-earned cash and got in, started doing a little bit of hobby. Fast forward to end times, and we all went looking for ranks and flanks, and I think the guys running the CanCon events started up the Kings of War event, and we sort of jumped in feet first. I got the Ratkin themselves were actually my first ranked up unit with multi-basing, and never looked back from removing single models off units. So I've been playing for probably about 10 years now. Have managed to win one Masters wooden spoon, and try and get out to as many of the events as I can. And now currently helping out run the Masters as part of the committee. It's probably my short and sweet background.
Yep, definitely. I'm glad you brought up that you were a master. I was going to have to add that in myself. Yeah, definitely one of the better travelled members of our community, Steve. From Queensland to Canberra, and all the tournaments in between. We just got to get those Western Australians to get one big enough to travel to.
That's it. And I've always got Clash as one of the travel events, Masters should I make it, and always one other travel interstate sort of booked in with the wife early in the year. So I absolutely love getting out, and got a bunch of mates around Australia that play the game, and that's why I get out and do it now.
Yeah, awesome. And Paul, you've been on a few episodes now, so people I think can hear your background story. Probably have you done an army review with us before, or just a couple of other episodes?
Just a couple of other episodes. This is my first army review, so excited to be part of it.
Excellent. Now, both of you have, some history with Ratkin Slaves. I'll put out there early. We didn't get any of the cheap comments this time about, what does Croger know about slaves? So what's he doing on the show? I definitely don't know much about slaves. I haven't played it. I'm just here to facilitate the discussion. But Steve, you mentioned you started with Ratkin, but the slaves have had a few outings for you, haven't they?
Yeah, I started playing them probably about 3 years ago. I've had the Abyssal Dwarves for a while. Obviously had the Ratkin for a while longer than that, and just kind of got them on the table. So I've played a few smaller Victorian events with those and finished on the podium, and more recently actually took them to Clash and somehow won Bloodiest General with them. So I don't know how Ratkin Slaves killed more than everyone else, but that's what the scoreboard says.
That's what happens when you explode everywhere, doesn't it? And everyone's body parts go flying. And what about yourself, Paul? What are your slave credentials?
I don't know about credentials, but I've used them quite a few times. I basically have only used evil armies. So I had a Abyssal Dwarf army was my first Mantic army, and I painted up some Ratkin about 3 years ago as well. And I thought, well, if I put the two together, I can have a new army, and that's sort of what I did. I haven't taken them to a tournament, but I've used them lots of times in lots of different ways. So they're my credentials, I guess.
I can't believe your Ratkin were a few years ago. I think you were doing them for the slow grow or something, right? Or you won prizes from the Australia-wide slow grow or something? Because didn't I send you something for your basing for that?
Yeah, you gave me some cool stuff to put on the bases.
Mm.
But that was probably 2 or 3 years ago.
Mm. Yeah, and I've certainly, I mean, I've played your slaves a couple of times on UB. So, and yeah, I mean, you pound me with almost any list you take, so it's probably no different. So, but the slaves do all right.
Yeah, I think they've got a bad reputation, but I'm of the opinion that, any army can be competitive, even Ratkin Slaves, which people think are pretty crappy. I think they're better than that. They've got some of the best units from the Abyssal Dwarves and the Ratkins, so and a few unique ones. So I think there's plenty there to be competitive on the table with.
Yeah, well, let's touch on that. I think people think when I call them the skid mark slaves, it's not about the power of their list. I think they've actually got a decent list and a decent power level. It's more where do they really exist in this game, and as a army list as a whole and their background, that they just seem to be a bit lacking. I mean, Steve, where do you, having taken them to a few tournaments and won bloodiest general with them, how do you find that they sit on the overall power level of things?
Look, they're probably right down the bottom power level wise as an army overall. It's certainly something I pick and choose to take to more friendly events so that you can push them a bit harder in the game, I suppose. They're definitely chock full of lots of really good units, as Paul said, though. Like there's a lot of great units out of Abyssal Dwarves in there, and particularly nearly all the improvements that happen to Abyssal Dwarves happen to units that also cross over into Ratkin Slaves. So I think they got a big jump in the last Clash update as well. But yeah, there's just something I think about the synergy as a whole that's just missing a piece or two, which would push it right over the edge. And I can't put my finger quite on what it is, but yeah, there's a lot there, but it just takes a little bit more to get something out of it.
I think they certainly lack a variety compared to other lists, don't they? In terms of unit types, in particular, there's a lot of stuff on foot, and not a hell of a lot of variety elsewhere. Paul, do you have anything to add to that?
It's not going to be spoilers, but we've all prepared a list for the end of the show. But I actually was going to bring one that was all fast units. So I think Ratkin Slaves can actually do more than one build. Like they can do an infantry heavy build, they can do a very fast build. I think they can also do like a shooty build. So there's a good unit of cavalry and some flyers and some chariots. I think you can. There's a few different options there if you want to explore them.
All right. Well, before we go too much further, we better do our hobby update. Steve, you're a renowned hobbyist, sometimes with the weird and wonderful. What are you
absolutely
currently...
love the weird and wonderful things. But yeah, I've recently finished up Empire of Dust Army in time for our Convict event. Was that about a month ago, maybe? And now I'm busy looking at Night Stalkers again. So I've got a fairly full Night Stalker army there, but managed to pick up the Champions box at Convict. So I've sort of pulled that out and adding a few more units to that, and yeah, it's probably mostly where it is. There's always something on the painting table for me, but it's usually adding and working through my cupboard of opportunity rather than starting something new.
And yourself, Paul, you showed us a couple of abyssal units before. Is that dominating the painting table at the moment?
Yeah, it's only been a few weeks, but I've started on the Force of the Abyss, a few things from the Vault, and a couple of the ambush boxes. So I'm enjoying them. They're very, very big figures, but you can just about get them on a base. So yeah, working my way through those. I mean, enjoying them. They're really nice sculpts. So
yeah, myself, I think I've got one regiment of the Abyssal Knights to do before I'd finish off about 2,500 points of them. Did a big reorganisation of the hobby space, and yeah, got to appreciate what's still in the pile of opportunity for me with that. But it also surprised me how sizable some of my Mantic armies are. But even then, I still never feel like I've got enough combinations for what I want to do, given that I don't tend to plan well before I start painting. I just pull out of the box and start painting. But yeah, I'm hoping we've got a 2-day in about a month now, and I think I'll take the Abyssals to that at 1999 5 points. So I'll have to make sure I've got a list and then make sure I can field it. Otherwise, I might have to add to it last minute. But yeah, that's me. And so if we'll head back to the slaves bit, what do you guys see as the pitch for playing this army? If you were trying to sell it to someone, Paul, we might start with you on this one. Why play the Ratkin Slaves?
it's an army that not a lot of people play. So you will play against people who have never seen it before. I think it's got a lot of fun elements. There's a lot of unusual and interesting troop types. Like I said a minute ago, you can play in a variety of different play styles. So overall, I think it's just an interesting army.
I sort of think it's a kind of army if you like blowing things up, if you like your decimators and fireballs, and potentially your units that you blow up, doing some extra damage there. If you're someone who likes Crystal Pendant, you might quite like a bit of what the slaves do. But otherwise, I think it does a solid sort of infantry kind of army a little bit better than what both Ratkin and Abyssal Dwarves would do separately. I think the combination of speeds and bits and pieces there really help that side of things. As Paul said, there's some really good fast elements in there as well, and I think they support and work quite well with the army.
Yeah, and just to annoy people, I'd say don't play the army because it may not be here in fourth.
It will be interesting because Abyssal Dwarves and Ratkin are surely going to be there because they've got rangers. So
yeah,
it is actually a supported army.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it will be very interesting. I think we didn't get very many comments, although it was only up for a couple of days. But there's a few passionate defenders, but I'm not sure how many. It was certainly not that many people playing them. But as you say, there is a range, so it'll all depend on what approach they take to lists, I guess, in terms of master lists or not moving forward, which I actually have no idea about. So we'll see. And so Adrian Scott's got a couple of questions for us. Well, there's a couple of people with, I guess, the similar question. If Slaves were to survive the leap to 4th edition, both he and Mark Zielinski ask kind of what would you like to see change primarily in the list?
That's a good question. I don't really have a good answer. I think there could be a few more units unique to Ratkin Slaves is the only thing I can think of. It'd be easy to say, well, add the Tangle and add, add gargoyles and things like that. But I think that would sort of diminish the value of those master lists. But I think a couple more interesting Ratkin Slave unique units would be good.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see some sort of Ratkin Slave monster that wasn't just on a chariot base, kind of something that bridges that gap between, your speed 4 and 6 infantry and your speed 8 fast units. But overall the list has got a bunch of really good stuff, and I think it's just a bit of time with it, getting used to it. So it doesn't need too much. I think it probably suffers a little from the short range shooting side of things, that people sort of look at that and go, well, that's what it does. Would love another war machine in there, but I think if we put too much in there, it'd actually probably break it and go the other way too hard. So I'm always looking at it and go, do you put the little grog mortar in and leave the Angkor mortar for the Abyssal Dwarves? Does that change it just enough? Don't know.
Yeah, I think for me, when I was preparing for this, compared to some other lists, other than a bit of rally for slaves, it obviously hasn't had the Mantic treatment yet, right? It's not very synergistic and doesn't have much interplay other than the rally. So, I don't think, which I think in the other lists that have had that treatment helps really build the theme and the flavor of the list. Whether that's the Northern Alliance and Frozen, or Regen in the Abyssals, or the Gastromancy and the Halflings. To me, it probably just doesn't have that thing that brings it the depth of flavour, which I think would be one of the reasons why people have trouble connecting with it a little bit. So Adrian Scott with another question said, and obviously we'll cover this somewhat when we go through unit by unit, but do either of you have things that are auto as well as like never ever takes? Steve?
Definitely a couple of autos in there for me. Slave Tunnel Runners with Brew of Sharpness seems to go into every list, but they always work a lot better with Golek Skinflayer sitting right next to them, so they almost go in as a default position, even if it's a slow flanking piece or part of a bigger army. And I'll admit I'm a sucker for the Decimators as well, so an elite horde of Decimators is usually a good starting spot for me. As for units I never take, probably I'm trying to see if it's actually in here, the Slave Wretch Horde, the Defense 2 for 115 points. Pretty much never ever makes a list for me, but most of the other bits and pieces I've played around with.
I always take the Abyssal Half-Breeds. They're not particularly Ratkin Slave type units, but I think they're really good value, and I use them in Abyssal Dwarves and in Ratkin Slaves. I don't think I'd leave home without them. I don't think there's anything I wouldn't take. I don't have figures for Decimators, so I never take them, but I think they're a staple of the list. And I think if I did have the figures, I would definitely use them.
I think that the half-breeds was certainly one of the biggest beneficiaries of the last clash, weren't they? I think that was a bit of a Mike Crossman parting gift of he always felt they were underpowered, which I don't know how he ever thought, but they're certainly a lot better now.
Yeah, they get to run around without boots of striding on now. Don't have to hide in the forest before they get involved.
Yeah, exactly. So they're very good. I agree. Okay, and then last question before we get into the list proper is Ratkin Slaves don't seem to get the auras and synergies that rats rely on. Do you guys think, and I guess this alludes to somewhat to what I was talking about, but the end of the question is do you believe that including Abyssal Dwarf stuff actually makes up for that?
I probably don't feel I miss the auras and synergies. It's not something I'm expecting to have. I actually don't particularly find I like the Ratkin as much as a playstyle that doesn't fit as well on me. It's kind of a bit more grind and heal style, at least what I try and build. So I do actually like adding those Abyssal Dwarves and having that little bit of punch, be it from Berserkers or Tunnel Runners or whatever, that just push over that little bit more. What you put your chaff out there with your lots of little bits and pieces of rats, and then come in and hit. And I think that feels quite good. So I think they do add up, just in that combat punch that you get.
Yeah, the Abyssal Dwarves have got that good nerve and the fury, so I don't think they need much help. Um, the only synergy really going on is the rally, and that's really hard to get unless you use a slave driver. It's just the skin flayer is the only real option. But the two don't really sort of mesh very well together as well. So even though they've sort of both got their own little thing, they don't. There's nothing to like. There's no buffs between the dwarves and the rats really. It's all just separate stuff. And I think that's an opportunity. Like if you're redesigning the list, I think you might start there and sort of have some sort of buff that the dwarfs give to the rats besides the rally one from the slave drivers.
Yeah, I totally
need
agree
some
with
sort
that.
of cracking the whip rule or something like that.
Yeah, which is sort of what is there now, but that's all that's there, right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's hard to put the rally in with the slave drivers. They don't quite fit as a unit you want to put in. So I do manage to squeeze that one chariot in, but you're only rallying the hammers, and you go let the infantry just deal with their standard average nerve.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the problem, isn't it? Is kind of, I guess, the rally's meant to represent that, but when you've got rallying representing something different in other lists, kind of the vibe doesn't necessarily feel that way. Obviously in Ratkin proper, the rally's meant to just be kind of a weight of numbers kind of rally more than anything else. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think that it feels a little bit undifferentiated from other stuff.
Yeah, I think even looking at the spells for the Ironcaster and probably prior to the last change where they pulled this Costa spells out, you were paying for, either Surge or Fireball or whatever came with the caster just in order to get a caster to go do something else and put it in. So it was a really expensive piece rather than having this Ratkin Slaves caster that you could put the spells you want on. You're sort of stuck. That's changed obviously with the clash, and there's some nicer builds you can do and have a cheap firing source with him. But until then, that sort of made it a lot harder.
Well, as we came on, I did do a brief check-in on whether you guys had any more idea about the fluff than I did, because I scoured the fluff book and was trying to find what have we got for canon for Ratkin Slaves, and there isn't a lot available. I mean, I think what might be a surprise to many of our listeners is that the Ratkin Slaves are technically basically the original Ratkin. So in terms of history, they predate the Ratkin because Barzak the Grim, I think it was was experimenting and created the Ratkin, and basically the Ratkin come about from splintering away, so a whole number of them escaping and then basically creating their own race, where you've still got those that survive remaining as the Ratkin slaves under the yoke of the Abyssal Dwarves. So if you hadn't looked into it before, I don't think at face value, given that Ratkin are generally the better known army with the model range, that that would be well known. Right, so with that, we might take a brief break, and when we're back, we'll get into the list proper.
I'm Alex Coos, and you're listening to Countercharge.
And welcome back. And so we'll go into the list proper now. So Ratkin Slaves are an evil army, which is why Paul plays them, because he never plays anything else other than evil. It fits his personality well. They do have kind of a special rule that crosses across. I mean, they've got a bit of rally, but then there's this rule called the last breath, isn't there? Steve, do you want to explain to us what the last breath does?
Yeah, so Last Breath is probably a little bit like Crystal Pendant for those that love running it. Basically, when the unit dies, I think it's got to be in combat. I'm not 100% sure.
Engaged.
You end up doing it's got to be engaged. Yeah, I knew there was something because of what the formation character can do. But you end up doing D3 wounds as opposed to the D6 that you would have got out of the Crystal Pendant.
It's 2d3 crushed or piercing 2 or crushed 2, whatever you call it.
Okay, right. Yeah, so that's basically, a little bit of gives someone I guess if units are running it, that little bit of caution, not unlike the pendant. Is it like the pendant, though, that the unit wouldn't take a nerve test from taking damage from it?
Yeah, correct. So there's no nerve test
Yeah.
off of that. It's just damage on the way out.
Well, we'll go through the list one by one. This is basically just how it's arranged in the companion, although we've kind of gone by troop type. So if there's any errors in this, don't blame me, blame Elliot. And we might start with the Berserkers. And so I'll run through the stat lines and then I'll get you guys to provide your input. So with the Berserkers, straight up, we've got Speed 5, Melee 3, Defense 3. They come in a troop and regiment. Unit Strength 1 and 3, Attacks 12 and 15, Nerve Dash 13 and Dash 17 for 105 and 165 points. As all good dwarves, their height 2. With the special rules, Crushing 1, Vicious for Melee, Wild Charge D3, and Ordered March, keywords Berserker and Dwarf. And you have a choice of upgrading those with Slaver Nets to give Ensnare for +5 and +10 points. Paul, what do you think of these guys?
I think they're good. I think they're fine. I think Berserkers, aside from the Abyssal ones, are still in a bad place. These ones are Speed 5 and Wild Charge, but they're still slow. They've still got low defense. But, if you can get them in the right spot, I think they can hit very hard. But they are hard to use. They're not frontline troops. The Slaver nets definitely helped them. I think they needed something, and that's definitely going to keep them alive in the combat. But you've got to get them delivered to the combat is the hard bit. So they definitely are finesse troops. I think they're good. Like they're better than some. The Ordered March definitely helps, and they're not real expensive. So I think they've got a place. I think they're just hard to use.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I absolutely love these guys myself, but I run them in troops. I have never actually run a regiment of them, but I find the dash 13 on the troop having that dash is awesome because when they're dead, they're out of the way. And with dash 13, even though they're defense 3, a lot of people don't get through them in the first go, particularly if they do have the slaver nets in the front. But I definitely use them as a second wave troop. They're usually coming out from behind the slaves in front of them and trying to chase those sneaky flanks that people aren't seeing. There's something to be said for 24 attacks, hitting on 3s with Crush 1 or Crush 2 if you can get that lovely Bane Chant in there as well. So certainly causes a lot of hurt when you get it to happen. And I find in the troop as well, you can put them out there as chaff you're happy to lose if you need to, and often they'll catch a unit for a little longer with the nets on them.
Yeah, I'm similar to you, Steve, in terms of Berserker units in general. Like, I play them a lot in the Dwarves, and I think, they can go front line. I quite like them as a second line. The introduction of Ordered March made something like the boots that give you nimble on the troop a little less valuable, but I quite like them still. And I think what these guys have going in their favour is that melee 3 with the native crushing, even though you got that low defense. So if you can protect them behind until they're going in. And one of the other things that the Slaver Nets does, I think, is if you get them into combat, and particularly if it's a multiple combat and something survives, it makes it less likely that they will counter against that unit because they'll be worried about not going through it potentially because of the ensnare. And so, it just increases their chance of getting multiple rounds of combat.
There's also the cheeky turn off of nimble when you hit with the ensnared unit as well, that often will catch people out. So it's pretty useful.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, ensnare for 5. I'm also similar to you, Steve, in that I can't recall ever taking a regiment unless there was some sort
unlock problem.
But yeah, I think if you've got 5 points, it's the ensnare for 5 points is almost too cheap to ignore.
It's probably one of the last things cut when you're shaving points for me. I'm prepared to take it off, but I'll put it on to start with.
All right. Well, then next up we have the Black Souls. So basically the standard infantry troop of the Abyssal Dwarves. So we've got Speed 4, Melee 4, Defense 5, come in troop regiments and hordes, 1, 3, and 4 unit strength, 10, 12, and 25 attacks, 10, 12 nerve, 14, 16, 21, 23, 75, 115, and 190 points. Again, height 2, with vicious melee, ordered march, keywords dwarf. You can exchange their shields for two-handed weapons, which would lower their defense to 4, and they would gain crushing strength 1. They can take throwing mastiffs for 15 points. Paul's favourite. He loves throwing mastiffs. And they can also take on one unit Fiery Bulwark, which gives them Iron Resolve D3 for plus 10 points. Steve, let's start with you.
I've definitely run them a few times. Not necessarily my favourite unit. I prefer the Berserkers and Immortal Guard over them, mainly because I have sort of different roles for them. And if they're just playing as a defensive regiment, I'll pick up some Ratkin Slaves instead. I have run the Horde with the Fiery Bulwark before as a big anvil out on the flank, and found that quite good. So worth a look if you need that kind of thing. But I think the list has got plenty of other options that do similar, but possibly better jobs.
Yeah, I'm the same. I've used them a few times. The last couple of times I've used them with the Hammer of Measured Force, and I think that's pretty good. They are significantly more expensive than just Ratkin Slave infantry. So I think you've got to do something to, so they give a bit more contribution in the list. But the Defense 5 is really nice. So I think, with the Vicious, you're probably doing 7-ish wounds with the Hammer of Measured Force, which is pretty solid. And the Fiery Bulwark can keep them in the game, especially if there's a Iron Caster or something with heal nearby. That's a very tough unit to take down. So, I don't mind it at all. I think it's pretty solid.
Mastiffs or no mastiffs for you guys?
No mastiffs for me, typically. I love firing off fireballs and decimators, but tend to find the mastiffs I don't have the space for. I'll spend the mastiff points on another unit of slaves instead.
Yeah, exactly the same. And especially if you're only taking one unit, like the one lot of mastiffs isn't going to do any damage. You need a lot of them to do damage.
Yeah, I certainly. I think it comes down to role, doesn't it? For me, this is one of those units that would be crying out for some sort of interaction with the slave units to make it more desirable to take. It just doesn't seem to quite fit the role like it does in dwarves. Like I quite like this standard unit in dwarves, where cheap blocks a unit strength, decent nerve, defense 5, and mastiff caddies, but it just doesn't really fill that role as well.
For what it's doing, I think the speed 4 doesn't tend to keep up with the rest of the rats that are trying to do a similar job.
Yeah, that's definitely a problem, isn't it? So, there is that disparity in this list when you've got things like the dwarves, which technically should be your blocks of nerve, but if they can't go with the rest of your list, it makes them a little bit. Well, you lose some of the value in your rats, I guess, if you have to keep them back. So, yeah, and you probably get. I mean, it's defense 2 to defense 5, but you get probably similar rolls out of some units later. All right, and then Steve, you mentioned this one, so onto the Immortal Guard. Oh God, the hiccups. So onto the Immortal Guard. So speed 4, melee 3, defense 5. Come in a troop and a regiment. Unit strength 1 and 3. Attacks 10 and 12. -13, -17. 105 and 160 points. Height 2 again. Special rules: regen 5+. Vicious melee. Ordered march. Keywords: dwarf, hellforged, immortal. You can get throwing mastiffs for 15 points. One unit can take the Infernal Warden's upgrade to gain crushing 1 for 10 or 15 points. What do you like about these, Steve?
One, the new upgrade, the Infernal Wardens there to get the Crush 1 has made all the difference between taking them and not taking them for me. And I actually use them in a really similar way to the Berserkers. They're troops only. I pretty much never take a regiment of them. The difference being here is they're in a position that you actually want to try and block with that Defense 5-13 and hold around a couple of units. And again, that hits on threes, crush one is a really solid spot for hitting, and they will get, again, the occasional flank charges where someone's looking at a higher value target that they don't get through, and the next thing you know, there's a mortal guard, 20 attacks on threes in the flank.
Yeah, I really like them too. I've started using multiple units of them sometimes, and I think these are the downside is that they're probably too good. So you're paying for a lot of things on a unit, but everything they've got is good. They've got regen, they've got crush, they've got potentially mastiffs, they're melee 3, they're dash. Like everything, if you were designing a unit, a lot of those elements would be in it, I think. But they're expensive. So if you take, 3 or 4 or so, it starts to really add up and you end up with not a lot of units in your army.
Again, I'd just love to see more interaction with the slave units. Particularly as an elite troop. Do you guys ever take troops of this?
That's all I take is troops.
Yeah.
But I think the price point on the troops is really good. Like 105 points for that dash 13 is a really good points. I'll take that over a regiment of Black Souls for similar sticking power.
You would still take the 10 point for the crush one, though.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I'd do it without. So it's 115 points for them or 110 points for Berserkers. They're usually my decision points, and I might take a combination of both. Again, both in troop sizes.
I've got to give it a go. I've only ever used them as regiments. I think what you're saying about troops is spot on. I've got to give them a go before they get nerfed.
Well, yeah, I kind of hope that when fourth rolls round that we see somehow a little more incentive for infantry troops. They're I would say generally on the rarer end, except for things like Berserkers.
It is the only army I tend to take troops in, and both of these because they've got the dash and that higher dash 13 rather than something a little lower, or getting wavered on a 10, 12 or whatever, 11, 13. The waver kills you. It's the dash that's really important.
Yeah, for sure. And so next up, we've got our 2 slave options in the infantry. So the first being Slave Warriors. Speed 6, melee 5, defense 4, regiment and horde, unit strength 2 and 3, attacks 12 and 25, nerve 12, 14 and 19, 21, points 85 and 140 at height 2, keywords expendable, Ratkin and Slave with the last breath option for 15 points. Paul, I guess this might be one of the options you were talking about instead of just your rank and file Black Souls.
Yeah, I really like these guys. It thematically feels like what a slave army should be made up of. I sort of wish you could take a legion, because I think that would be pretty cool. But I think they're really good. Like the last breath is interesting. It's fun, stuff blowing up when you get routed. Like that's exactly what I think the army should be about. I don't think they're going to win you a game or anything, but they're definitely hard to deal with on the table. I usually use at least a couple of units of them. In the list I have later on, I've got 4 units of them. And I think they can definitely build a wall in the front of your army, that your opponent has to deal with in 6 turns, and that's not necessarily an easy thing to do.
And when you're saying units, Paul, are we talking regiments, hordes?
I just used hordes. Yeah, I haven't tried the regiments. I think the hordes is where it's at for my playstyle.
Some pretty cheap blocks of nerve with a bit of rally hanging around, isn't it? For 140 points for a horde and some.
For sure.
Covering basically a whole of a board if you've got 4 of them.
And I think regiments are good too. I just don't have the models to run them. Like if you can put 4 or 5 units down for your opponent to deal with, that's a lot of units they've got to find an answer to. So I think regiments can definitely work as well.
And Steve?
It's real interesting. Paul and I run very different Ratkin slave ideas. I love the regiments. So I usually have a couple of them. Of note, the way I build the list, and we'll see it when we get to Decimators, not unlocking. This is actually one of the units that's getting me some cheap unlocks and letting me play around with some bits and pieces. I find I usually have at least two sort of running out in front of Decimators as that initial sort of block and hold things off, and often have my berserkery type troops coming in from behind those. I will run a horde if I need to in order to get some unlocks to fit a bunch of bits and pieces in. But I think they do the job they need to. The speed 6 is enough to be able to get out in front of the dwarves and get a pivot in there as well to help protect things, or that full push forwards of 12 inches to buy a bit of space if you need. So I think that speed 6 on them really helps when you're looking at shooting with your dwarf line. The last breath I can take or leave. You'll find when I've get to my list, I have all of the units that are in the formation, but I'm not running the formation because I didn't want to pay for last breath. So yeah, it's something I don't utilize enough there potentially, but at the same time, I've usually only got a few units. It's only a couple of points of damage somewhere on the board rather than a big question the opponent has to ask themselves: do they want to run into that unit?
Yeah, the regiments are certainly a very efficient unlock, aren't they, for 85 points?
For sure.
And the unit strength too. It just occurred to me as we were running through that for a list that has a reasonable amount of infantry options, one thing it lacks compared to, say, other lists with similar amounts of infantry options is it doesn't have that thunderous defense in the form of a phalanx unit, does it?
Correct.
So that's a bit of a weakness in the list. I would have thought you could get some spears in some slaves' hands somehow, but obviously not.
And you can in the Ratkin, just not in the slaves.
Yeah, maybe there's just no long staves of wood left in the, Abyssal Dwarf's homeland or something.
Yeah.
Who knows?
All the Ratkin that escaped took all the spears with.
Yeah. Okay, and so then our final unit in the non-ranged infantry is the slave wretches, which are also an irregular unit. So they're speed 6, melee 5, defense 2, unit strength 3 and 4, attacks 25 and 30, nerve 18, 21 and 24, 27, points 115 and 120, with the keywords expendable, Ratkin Slave, and again with the option of the last breath. So with old mate with rally 2, that goes to nerve of a top of 29, doesn't it? Which breaks the old -28 rule of being the highest nerve.
True.
A couple of things that do that now, I think. I think, who was it that mentioned they used this? We'll start with, it
wasn't
Paul,
me.
I think.
Yeah.
Steve, you were a never use kind of.
Yeah.
Paul, what makes you like these?
I've only used them once or twice. I think they're dirt cheap is what's got going for them. They don't unlock is a problem. So I find it's hard to build a Ratkin slave list with enough unlocks as it is. So it seems very rare that you have the unlocks to spare to take this unit. But 29 nerves pretty cool if you can get it on the table. But yeah, I normally go with slave warriors rather than slave riches. I think they do a very similar job, but the defense 2 means they're just going to melt under shooting or in combat to just about anything. So I think the slave warriors are a better bet. But if you want to fill the army with slave, this is probably the way to go. I know some people like to run a second line of defense 2, and I think that could definitely work. While the enemy's busy killing off the front line, you've got a second line to sit on objectives or, get in zones for control or what have you. I think that's definitely a way they could work. But like I said, they don't unlock, so that is a challenge.
And is it the unlocking mostly that makes them a never for you, Steve, or?
All right, one sec. I've lost audio. Is that coming through all right for you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, my headphones
okay,
turned off, so I think I'm on my laptop's speaker instead.
Oh, no worries. So is it the unlocking that makes them a never for you, mate? Or
Yeah, I pretty much echo everything that Paul's really saying there around that. I never take them because I just need those unlocks, and I think a Def 4 Horde, if I've got to take that, I'll take that over trying to cheap out and have the Defense 2 version of it. I do run them a little bit in Ratkin, not that I run Ratkin a lot, but they've got a different use in that list. But yeah, for this one, it's unlocks as a problem.
yeah, and I think because you're not really comparing them in this list to other stuff that's maybe Defense 3, like your next jump is Defense 4, and I think there you do get a big loss from 4 to 2, and compared to, I kind of see the difference between Defense 3 and 2 is a little bit more irrelevant if you're facing a lot of stuff that has crushing or thunderous anyway. It's wounding on 2s anyway. So, yeah, and I think in this list in particular, where you've got some limited options, not unlocking is a big problem. Most of the time. All right. Well, that concludes just the foot sloggers, and to an extent, where then we've got our single ranged infantry option, which Steve, you mentioned at the top, and that's the decimators, who are also an irregular unit. Speed 4, melee 4, ranged 4, defense 4, troop, regiment, and horde for 1, 3, and 4 unit strength. Attacks 10, 12, and 25. Nerve 10, 12, 14, 16, 21, 23. Points 115, 155, and 260. Height 2. Special rules, ordered march, keywords dwarf. Ranged attacks, blunderbuss 14 inches with piercing 1, steady aim, and vicious ranged. And we have an option to gain an alternate single-use ranged attack, it's a mobile Katsuchan for 24 inches, attack 3 attacks, range 4, blast D3, indirect, reload, and vicious ranged for plus 20 points. Steve, given you're the one using them, let's start with you.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love these guys. These are, first in most of my lists. First unit always ends up with elite. So running elite and vicious on your PC1 shooting is great. These guys got an upgrade to the 14-inch shooting on the latest Clash update, and I think that's made a massive difference. Getting that effective 16-inch range shooting has really helped out. So I kind of build lists around protecting these guys and trying to have them shoot for 3 or 4 turns in the game and be there towards the end of the game. And they're one of the reasons I ended up killing so much stuff at Clash this year. They were one of the primary damage dealers. I don't know about you, Paul. I've never actually run the mobile Katsuchan. I find I'm always trying to move up turn 1, so I never really get that 1 turn free for a don't move shoot.
No, I think just having them, naked or with elite or something is the way to go too. I know every time I see these across the table, I'm scared, and I'm working out from deployment how to deal with them. So they're definitely very strong, and they're sort of like a signature unit of Abyssal Dwarves and I guess Ratkin Slaves, aren't they? Just about everyone runs them. Very strong, and they're good at, like, even in a fight, they're really good, especially if they're elite. So I definitely think they're one of the go-to units. I need to pull my finger out and get a unit painted up, I think, because I agree they're very strong.
I may have 2 hordes of them, just saying.
Yeah, well, that was going to be the next question. Anything but hordes, and would you take 2?
I've painted the 2 hordes. I've not got them on the table yet in a list. I always tend to not quite like how it looks in the end of it. I've definitely thought about the regiments before, and I tend to end up either looking at two regiments or one horde, and the one horde always wins out with the elite boost on it. And I've come very close to running troops for very similar reasons to running the Immortal Guard, just as that sort of frontline blocker, but with the potential of 10 shots before they're getting charged. But yeah, I think in anything that's a serious list, it's always been hordes.
I tried two regiments on UB once, and I split them up, and I found they didn't do very much individually. But I think if you had two regiments or a couple of troops and a regiment or something together, I think that would be quite effective. But yeah, I think the horde is probably the way to go.
I think when they were range 12 shooting, I liked the two regiments because you could actually reach some things. Now that extra 2 inches of shooting, the horde can reach so many more pieces.
I think
you lose a bit of efficiency with the regiments in terms of cost, and what else does it cost you in the list? I'm similar to you, Paul. If I know I'm playing against this, particularly since the 14 inches, I'm watching where is this going, so I don't get gives me a little bit of a big dookie in my Reg Grundies. I'm a bit scared of it. I just
got to.
But this.
Sorry,
you go.
I was going to say you got to work out how to get hero into it, and tie it up for a turn or two.
Yeah, that's true. Obviously, there are a lot of armies that can disrupt it quite easily, right? Whether it's an annoying flying Basusu thing or something else. So I think when you're taking the horde, probably the rest of your list construction is pretty important, isn't it? So that that's either not happening or that it's not becoming the singular target for all your opponents shooting for turn 1 or 2 because it's still speed 4.
Yeah, when I build around it, I've definitely got a formation there that stops people even getting that single flyer in. I know I've had quite a few games against AG actually where he's just not been able to get something into the decimators for 3 or 4 turns, and it's so much fun watching him struggle trying to do that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's the infantry done and dusted. So we might take a brief break and we'll be back moving on to the cavalry.
Hi, this is Rob Berman and you're listening to Countercharge.
And welcome back. So then we have our single cavalry unit, which is the Abyssal Half-Breeds, which you heard Paul talk about at the top of the show, which are speed 8, melee 3, defense 4, come in a troop and regiment, unit strength 1 and 3, attacks 8 and 16, nerve 12 and 14, and 15, 17, points 125 and 190 at height 3. Special rules, crushing strength 1, fury, regeneration 5+, thunderous 1, vicious melee with the keyword abomination. So, Paul, why don't you take us through your favourite little unit there?
I do love them. This is my sort of ideal hammer unit. I don't like to spend 250 points on a hammer. I like to spend less than 200 points on one. And of course, they've got their downside. They're only defense 4. They're only speed 8. They are cavalry, so they are subject to phalanx and all the other problems that cavalry have, but they've got a good nerve, they've got regen, they've got good attacks, they've got crush 1. So I find these are excellent if you can keep them from people shooting at them. So I run them in the same way that I think Steve runs his berserkers. I run these behind the slaves and look to use them as second hitters. So any chip damage that they've got from people shooting at over the top or something, I've probably regened off. Because they're 15, 17, they're very, very hard to take out in one turn unless, someone's putting 2 units into them. And they're fast enough to be second line hitters. So, sometimes if there's enough space, you can get these guys and a unit of slaves into a combat together. Or, if slaves die, these guys can punch through the gap with something. And they do enough damage. They do sort of 7 or 8 wounds, probably closer to 7, I think. But they've got fury to keep them in the fight, regen. I love this unit. I wish it could be in more armies.
I think I'm glad it's not, Paul.
Yeah. I wish I had more than 3 units painted.
I think I played a game on UB against you where you ran 4 units of them. I'm pretty sure.
Doesn't sound like me.
That was yeah, it sounds absolutely like you.
I think I had a unit of
What about
grotesques and 3 units of half breeds, but I might have had 4. Might have done.
Yeah.
They good.
What about for you, Steve?
Yeah, look, I'm also quite a fan for the half breeds. I used to run one of back in the day in the Abyssal Dwarves all the time. Mine tend to always end up with boots of striding, trying to come out of a forest. They're not usually got a line of protection in front of them, but more used there to project the threat and work alongside some of the other faster elements in the list. They also take elite quite well if you're not running decimators, who will get it ahead of them every single time. But that buff to 15-17 over 14-16 and Fury as well has just been huge for them. They've taken a massive jump, and I think you see a lot more people running them. And it's a really cheap cav unit for one that actually has crushing, not just straight thunder.
I don't think they. I think that nerve buff means that Def 4 hurts a lot less, right? There's not much that.
Yeah.
They don't typically get shot off in one turn anymore, and then they're regenning some of it back, and they still get a chance to put out their hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're one of the few hits on threes fast pieces that the army has, at least with that items. So that's always nice having that ranged threat with that little more consistency on the attack.
And then we came to the Steve Tuck personal favourite, the Slave Tunnel Runners. So they're a chariot unit, speed 8, melee 4, defense 5, troop and regiment available, unit strength 1 and 2, attacks 16 and 24, nerve 12, 14 and 14, 16, points 170 and 210 with the special rules crushing strength 1, thunderous charge 1. They're at height 3. Keywords Ratkin and Slave. What's your best use of these, Steve?
Well, one default goes in the list with the +1 to hit. So, 24 attacks on threes. Everyone loves that, and you get the lovely regiment discount on that. That's kind of my stock standard flanking piece, the thing you start building a more heavy, fast list around. I think, as I said at the top, it's always got Golek for the Rally 2 sitting next to them, so they are typically 16, 18, Def 5, so they do stick around for a little while. I also have played around a little bit with troops of those with the skirmishers boots on for nimble, which can be quite a fun little unit. It is expensive and does disappear a little quicker than you'd like it to, but yeah, it's an interesting piece to be able to run straight down the flank and take that nimble pivot and threaten the full cavalry's worth of attack.
The only thing I'd add to that is it's one of the few units that's defense 5 in the list. So it is a little bit more robust, and it potentially 16, 18. It can stay in the fight a little bit longer than some of the other slave units. Definitely a good unit.
Yeah, 16, 18's defense 5's nothing to sneeze at, right? That's up there with your great units like your Night Stalker Butchers or things like that. You're obviously not getting the extra unit strength and things, but you're getting more attacks. And yeah, I think that's it's certainly a very good unit for sure. Paul, are you as big a fan of the +1 to hit the Brewer Sharpness as Steve is?
Yeah, I am. And a shout out for Blood of the Old King as well. They are only regiments, so you get the cheap price on Blood of the Old King. And in this list, with all the other Abyssal Dwarf stuff being vicious, it's sort of not worth the upgrade, but this unit definitely is. There's good 15 points on this one.
Yeah, since they made the item good again. So next up, we have the single swarm in the list, which is the Vermintide. Speed 6, melee 5, defense 3, regiment, regiment and horde, both at unit strength 1, given it's a swarm. Attacks 9 and 18, nerve 9, 11 and 12, 14. Points 65 and 110. Nimble, vicious, melee and wild charge D3. Keywords beast, expendable and vermin. How often are these seeing play for you, Steve?
I'll put these pretty much in every list. I think they're great chaff. They're definitely part of the defensive block I set up for my decimators as well. Making use of that height one and letting decimators take some early shots with a bit of cover over the top of them without being charged back is really nice. I do find the speed 6 is really useful in that role, but it's just too slow when I'm wanting to be aggressive down a flank, and this is, again, being really the only sort of chaff piece. Also what I'm trying to put out in front of half-breeds and tunnel runners. So that I do find that a little difficult at times there. But people do underestimate them, and I've killed some really interesting units with these things, with random flanks and wild charges suddenly turning up and having that, again, a flank 18 attacks on 5s into a caster or something, sort of monster-sized caster that wasn't expecting it. Can be a nice little surprise.
Yeah, I usually include one as well. I think they're a handy little unit. I don't have decimators to protect, but they can sit on an objective or be chaff or hit someone in the flank, just like you said. I agree. I think they're, for the points cost, they're a great little unit.
I think the great thing, they're perfect for decimator defense, right? Particularly with the nimble, if you can just run them out of the way when you want to, or charge them into something to give you that extra turn to get up close, and you're seeing over the top of them. And particularly because they've got, I'm just thinking, I'm going to set up. No, one regiment doesn't quite cover more than half, does it? Well, with careful positioning, it might to protect them, give them cover quite well across frontage and shooting.
I find the nimble on these guys is actually the reason I'll run Ratkin Slaves over Abyssal Dwarves when I'm wanting to run the style of list I do with the Decies. Just that extra little bit of speed plus the nimble over what Dogs in Abyssal Dwarves does is enough to push me into this list.
Yeah, nimble makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, huge.
All right, and then we've got our large infantry, which are the Slave Nightmares, which I think is, I don't know, I certainly hear this kind of unit hotly debated. So speed 6, melee 4, ranged 4, defense 5, regiment and horde versions, unit strength 2 and 3, attacks 9 and 18, nerve 11, 13, and 14, 16, points 140 and 230. Special rules, crushing strength 1 and vicious, keywords abomination, slave, and tech. And they've got, of course, the blight cannons with 12-inch steady aim. So these guys, I guess, are your ogre boomer equivalents of the Ratkin slaves. Paul, you quite like this style of unit in other lists, don't you? I feel.
I do like this unit. I think the one downside it has against, say, the Ratkin equivalent is that it's harder to be rallied. So the 14-16 is hard to get to 16-18 unless you've got Golic Skinflayer nearby. So it's a little bit harder to use, in my opinion, in Ratkin Slaves. But I do like this sort of unit. I think it's good in a fight. It's defense 5. It's good at shooting. Yeah, so I do have one and I use it. I think it's quite good. But you have to be a bit careful about where you put it and how you protect it, to make sure it's in the rally bubble, in my opinion.
For me, these ones I'm less sure on them. I want to like them, and I keep trying them and putting them in lists, but they're just not quite there for me. And it's hard to put, I think, my finger on what it is. I think you kind of want to be in combat a little bit more because you get the crushing with them, but then you're paying all of these points for the blight cannons as well. So I think it's just the points cost of this unit pushes it a long way up. And I think Paul's comments on the rally are pretty good as well. I mentally put them in thinking they're going to be 16-18 because, of course, they're going to stand next to Golic, who's also standing next to the tunnel runners and standing next to the other unit of slaves. So they always feel really good, and then they're always just a bit meh in game. But there's nothing else that kind of fits that spot. This might be kind of my in that little wish list area where I want that monster or something to bridge the gap between the infantry and the cav, and I think this unit's trying to do it, but it's costing too much, or it's not doing it well enough, or whatever combination of those you see it as.
Yeah, if you were wanting to double down on your short range shooting thing, but I'm just not sure that works against a lot of armies.
If
to
I'm
be
spending
honest.
230 points, I'll put a second decimator horde in. It's not that much more, I think.
For sure. Yep. And you probably get more out of it, to
Yeah,
be
it'll be
honest.
a lot more nerve and another 7 shots, and sure, it's a lot more board space, but decimators fight just as well. They both hit on 4s, just misses the crushing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's
totally
the big
agree.
difference. That the nerve of the horde is just huge compared to these guys. Even though the decimators are only defense 4, like they're just so much more survivable, in my opinion, than these guys.
All right. Well, then we have the single war engine. Speed 4, range 5, defense 5. Units, obviously comes in a single unit, but it has unit strength 1, 4 attacks, nerve 10, 12, 85 points. Keywords Dwarf and Hellforged. Its ranged attack is Katsuchan rocket launcher, 48 inches, blast D3, indirect, piercing 1, reload, vicious ranged, and ignores obscured. I don't mind these because of the 4 shots, to be honest. I think and they're pretty cheap at 85 points as far as something with 4 shots goes. And if you're lucky enough to get a few of them to hit, it can put out a little bit of hurt. Did either of you guys use them?
Don't use them, but I put them in so many lists, and they're one of the last things cut as I shave points out. I have put them in the list I'll run through later on, but I think 2 of them is a sweet spot if you can fit it in the list. Like those 8 shots deal with a lot. I think they're more there for chaff clearing or just putting a little bit of fright into units. They're not the kind of remove unit war machine, but I've definitely seen 2 used quite effectively if you can get them shooting all game.
I think they're much more usable now that they've got straight unit strength. I don't usually like range 5 artillery, but I think the 4 shots makes them usable. And they're quite reliable because they're vicious. They're, abyssal dwarfs, so they're vicious. And that does make a difference. If you can get a hit, you're probably going to do. You got more chance of doing wounds, haven't you? Because they're piercing 1 vicious. But I've been using them a little bit, and I think they're worth taking, especially in a list where you don't have much shooting, to sort of, as Steve said, to clear chaff and create problems for people.
You had at Convic a real fun game playing against these. I was running Ratkin Slaves there, so we had 2 of them in there, and he was sitting there humming and hawing for about 2 or 3 minutes as to whether fire both of them at my unit sitting on a token or to turn both of them sideways and walk onto separate tokens themselves to score. He ended up going and taking the tokens, and then didn't get the turn roll he needed and lost them the next turn. But it was a great watching that interplay of there was 2 different ways to go to win the game, and what was more likely to work.
I definitely feel like with a lot of war machines, like 1 doesn't feel like enough. You don't get, you get some value. It's only 85 points, but you get probably infinitely more value, particularly because of the 4 shots with a couple. But by then you're at 170 points, and yeah, I think that it becomes much more debated of its use. 3 even better. All right. And then lots of single unit entries here, but the only monster, which is the Slave Death Engine Impaler, which is a monster chariot, speed 8, melee 4, defense 5, unit strength 1, attacks D6 plus 7, dash 16, 180 points, crush 2, rampage melee D6, vicious in melee, and wild charge D3. Do you like a bit of the Death Engine, Paul?
I haven't used them on the table. I've tried them on UB. I think they're a lot of fun. They're really fast. They've got good crushing strength. They're vicious, got wild charge. They're fearless. Like they've got a lot of good things. I think the problem with them is that they're only got rampage. So against ogres or large infantry or what have you, they're a little bit harder to use because they've got a variable attacks. Potentially, you could just be 8 attacks if you roll badly. But if you can line them up in the right against the right target and get them in the flank potentially, I think they can do a lot of damage. But they're really cool models, and I think they're also they can share the rally from the slave keyword. So I think they're definitely a lot of fun. As I said, I've only used them on the UB, but definitely a fun unit.
Yeah, agree there. These don't tend to make it into my list as much, and when we see Kryz's version, we'll understand why. But what we have had is down Geelong Way is Oz is busy terrorising us all with a list that has 3 of this plus Kryz and a bunch of Taskmasters on Chariot to push them up to the -17, -18. And when you've got that many things with a potential 19-inch charge range that are unlikely to die on the swing back, it does get quite scary. The one big downside these have is they hit on 4s and they absolutely hate terrain, which is why I don't run them, because my one is invariably in terrain every time it charges, and hitting on 5 with what is usually 7 attacks instead of more than that for me when I roll my random amount, or 8 attacks, I should say. It just doesn't get enough out of it as a single use. But definitely, if you're prepared to go for the multiples, there's something there.
Do you miss the shooting option from the regular?
I would probably run it, and that I was one of the things I was wondering, was that the piece that I'm missing? I wouldn't run the shooting option in Ratkin, but maybe I'd run it in Ratkin Slaves.
Yeah, I've seen it used really well in Ratkin, but I do agree. I think it would give this list something more again. Another distraction piece, from your decimators or something like that. That's like D6 plus 7 for a shooting attack is pretty reasonable, particularly if it's combining with other stuff. Like if you had a shooting attack, a couple of Katsuchan rocket launchers, and your decimators, I think that's a pretty nice, shooting core without dominating too much of your list.
Yeah,
I think it would be fun. I think from memory they don't have steady aim. The
yeah. I
skewers.
don't
I could be
think they
wrong though.
do.
Yeah, so you've got to get them in the right spot. The good thing about the formation is it gives you steady aim and inspiring in Ratkin, which is that's really good in my opinion. And I think this is sort of what we were saying about Ratkin Slaves. Like they're just missing some of the really good units from both sides, from both the Ratkin and the Abyssal Dwarf side. And that's just the flavour of the army. It doesn't have access to everything. But yeah, I would totally take it if you could have spewers with steady aim.
All right. Well, we're about to move into the hero section, so we might take another break, and we'll be back shortly after this.
Hey, I'm Alessio Cavatore, and you're listening to Countercharge.
Okay. All right. Welcome back. And now we're on to the heroes. So we've got a few here. Almost feels like it's almost half the rest of the list, to be honest. First up, we've got the Ironcaster. At base level is 50 points. Speed 4, melee 4, defense 5. 1 attack, nerve 11, 15. Special rules, individual inspiring. Ariagful's Flame. Keywords, dwarf, hellforged. There's got the command options available to it. And then a bunch of different spells: Fireball, Surge, Lightning Bolt, Bane Chant, Heal, and Mind Fog. All for various points. As you said, you used to have to pay a hefty premium to get anything that was, that was reasonable there. Steve, let's start with you on the Ironcaster, and we should probably cover what
Yeah.
Ariadne's Flame does.
So Area Ghoul's Flame, I don't know what I end up calling it when I use it. Effectively vicious for your fireball is what that rule equates to. I find these guys really good. The sweet spot for me in my list is actually just with Fireball. Becomes a cheap 85-point inspiring source with a bit of range there. I definitely liked the Fireball when we're playing with Command for that extra 3 inches you can get off the Command dice on spells. Just pushes that Fireball range out to keep up with the 14 inches that Decimators can shoot out as well. We can definitely tell it's something ported across from the Abyssal Dwarves because we don't have anything to surge in the list, but we can put it on the Ironcaster if we want. Other than that, I do tend to put a Bane Chant on, but I kind of avoid putting too many spells on or it does get quite expensive. I think the Lightning Bolt 3 is a little underwhelming when we don't have a lot of other long-range shooting. Certainly, you'd look at that a little bit more if we had just that little bit of extra range across the list. But cheap inspiring source and typically the spell you want heals pretty good as well.
Yeah, I'm in the same camp. I think they get quite expensive because all of the basic spells are quite expensive. If you're paying for Fireball, it's Fireball 12, which is great, but obviously it's expensive. I've toyed around a couple of times with the Diadem of Dragonkind, which makes it Fireball 18. That's pretty solid, especially when they're all vicious. But I think that's an extra 30 points, so it does start to get very expensive. I normally just run it with Fireball, sometimes with Heal, but I think they're really good. Vicious Fireball at the end of the game can take units off. They only need a couple of wounds, and you can do that easily with Fireball 12, and it's shattering. So I think they're a good little unit.
Yeah, for sure. I think the Fireball is one of the only options that seems that worth it in this list, to be honest on that. It's just, I feel like a lot of the other options feel a little bit overpriced. I mean, Bane Chant 2, so I guess you got to take the Conjurer's Staff at that point, don't you? I think comboing it, I kind of feel like you might be missing out if you didn't take Bane Chant. If you were taking anything else, you may as well take Bane Chant for an extra 20 points. But yeah.
Yeah, is it 25 or 20 points?
20, if the companion's right.
Yeah, I think it's 20.
A bit dubious.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. All right, well, we'll move on to the Overmaster. Hero Infantry, 105 points, speed 4, melee 3, defense 6, 5 attacks, 13, 15, crushing strength 1, individual, inspiring, mighty, vicious melee, command options, and then Infernal Advance, so gain Aura Strider infantry only for plus 20 points. Paul, let's start with you on this one.
I've toyed around with this guy. I've thought he's a good candidate for the Wings of the Honey Maze, in my opinion, because he's sort of quite reliable, melee 3, 5 attacks. He's mighty, so he can be a real pain in the backside. I think the Strider Aura is handy, but unlike a lot of other armies, there's not really very good infantry units to be recipients of that aura. I guess the best one would be the Immortals, but it's starting to get very expensive. He's 100 points by himself, or 105. But he is a good combat individual, in my opinion. So I've used him a couple of times. I think he can serve a purpose. But once you start putting items on him and stuff, he does start to get quite expensive.
Yeah, for me, I've got one of these guys modelled up with wings on his back, but he hasn't actually made it into the Ratkin Slaves list for me yet. As an entry, a couple down the Abyssal Half-Breed Champ is always knocks that guy out for exactly the same amount of points. I think you get more for that. Again, I wouldn't use the Strider Aura. I think you're not hitting hard enough with your big blocks of infantry to be worth building around that. The way I do it with the troops, you're more looking for that opportunistic attacks, and hits on 3s to 4s is fine still if you're catching flanks with your troops. So yeah, doesn't really make the cut for me.
Yeah, interestingly, in this list, I'm probably less inclined to do wings than, say, in the dwarf list. I think it'd depend on, your list build. But if you were going for a really attritional kind of slave wretches heavy list, I really enjoy Mighty on a character. Not that many have it. And at defense 6, if he buys some of your scoring units an extra turn or two, it's less likely again that your opponents are going to make it through if you built a list with just waves of slave variants.
Yeah.
But at speed 4, it's debatable whether he gets into anything that he chooses to get into.
Yeah, like he's pretty cheap.
Yeah,
You probably need to say Rally 2 on him instead of Strider or something like that to get into the flavour.
and he can't have a mount or anything to make him a little bit quicker. So unless you take the wings of the honey mace, he's sort of stuck at speed 4. He doesn't have regen. I mean, regen, he'd be a bit more of a monster. But you
Needs a
compare
battle
him
rat.
to
Ride a rat into
or to ride a slave into battle.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, he's a bit lackluster, isn't he?
Mm. So speaking of slaves, next up we've got the slave driver. So speed 4, melee 4, defense 5, 1 attack, 10, 12 nerve, 55 points. Individual, inspiring, rallying 1, slaves only, vicious melee. And then your command options. So this is basically your standard bearer variant for the Ratkin slaves. Yeah, I mean, pretty cheap for an extra rallying option if you're lacking on a bit of inspiring, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if you wanted a command dice caddy, if you were playing with command dice.
Yeah, I think if you're chasing the Rally, you put this guy in and he probably picks up a Bane Chant. But if you're looking for just the inspiring and a Bane Chant, you'll pick up the Ironcaster instead because he's 5 points cheaper and does the Bane Chant another 5 points cheaper. So really, you're chasing that Rally, and you're going to want to be supporting some of your infantry. Definitely has a place in the list, but you're building around it a bit.
Yeah, particularly a good option with the chasing the rally, I guess, Steve. If you've got your Chrysler, down to not your Chrysler, your Golek Skin Flayer gives rally 2, doesn't he?
He does, yeah.
Down to being inspiring everything else on the board. It could be your little bit of backup for a bit of cheap rally, I guess.
The only thing I'd add to that is he's not a bad item caddy. So if you want to give him the heal item or the hex item, he can carry that quite cheaply.
Yeah, I'd argue
or
you can do that still cheaper with the Ironcaster though, because it has those spells and is cheaper. So you've got to have used up your 3 slots of Ironcaster, I think, if you're doing that.
Yeah, true. It's only useful if you want the rally 1.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Rally 1 and heal or something. But I agree, the Ironcaster is probably a better bet.
And then we go on to a unit that I know is another favourite of yours, Paul, the Abyssal Half-Breed Champion. Speed 8, melee 3, defense 5, crush 2, fury, individual, inspiring, mighty, regen 5, vicious melee, keywords abomination and half-breed. Has 6 attacks at 12, 14 for 145 points. And command options, half-breed champs, so good.
Are good. I went off them for a little while, but I'm back on them again. I think they're really good value. The only thing they don't do is score. So a bit like Abyssal Dwarfs, Ratkin Slaves have a lot of heroes that are individuals. So you've got to be a bit careful about what you take. If you take, 2 of these and 2 Ironcasters and, a Taskmaster, all of a sudden you've got, a lot of individuals. So you've got to be a bit careful there, in my opinion. But I think they're really solid for what they do. I use these for chaff as well. because defense 5, 12, 14 with Fury, like it's unlikely they're going to get taken down in the crackback. So, this is a great unit for throwing into decimators or, pack hunters or any of those sort of archer units. But they, even if they do take a good hit, they take 8 wounds or something, they can regen it back again, and they've got Fury, so it's very rare that they've got nothing to do in the game, that they're shut down, and they're so quick that they can jump between units, being disruptive. And I've often played games where, I've got 2 of them left at the end of the game, in the middle of the table, just causing chaos. So I think they're really good units.
Yeah, 100%. I've always put at least one in my lists as well. Pretty much echo everything you've said there. I reckon they carry some cheap items pretty well as well. You can go Gnome Glass Shield for that Def 6, and that just with that 12-14 nerve, that can tank a charge from something pretty well. You've got to put a fair bit in to get rid of them. I love running mine with Brutal, just to give that extra little bit of something in melee. And also the cheeky option to give them the Duelist Blade and have your height 3 looking over the infantry running around and tagging those mages hiding in the back lines. Hasn't worked for me yet, though. Although I did get Groany Snark.
I haven't thought of that, but I really like that, especially with all the crones and stuff around at the moment. I might try that.
Yeah, it's 18 attacks on 3s, crush 2 feels real good.
And then next up we have the Taskmaster on Chariot, who is speed 8, melee 3, defense 4, unit strength 1, 5 attacks, 11, 13, 110 points, inspiring, nimble, rallying 1, slaves only, thunderous charge 2, vicious melee, keyword dwarf, and the command options. Do you guys like a bit of a Taskmaster?
I like him fine. For me, he's that second source of rallying, and you'll see it in the list I've got. I think I prefer these, even if it's supporting the infantry line with the rally over the guy on foot, just because they have that little bit of extra nerve, a little bit of extra speed, so they can run out and play chaff if they need to. The 5 attacks in the flank, again, doubling up to 10 on hits on 3s is pretty good if you can get it. So it's just kind of an all-round, does a job, but you're not going to miss him if he's not there either.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think the downside to him is he's a little bit weak. He's only defense 4 and he's 11, 13. So easy to take off. And if he doesn't break through a unit, he's only got thunderous charge, so he's not very good in a grind situation. I think it's worth mentioning that you get the Taskmaster as part of the formation, and one of the reasons the formation is quite expensive is he gets a nerve bump. He goes to 13, 15, but he also gets a special rule that he can basically choose a unit, a slave unit, and take it off. Just route that unit in the game at the start of I think it's at the start of his move.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting rule. But, like I said, it does eliminate one of the problems that he's got. It gives him a big nerve boost. 13, 15 is significantly better than 11, 13. So, if you like that sort of unit, he's good in the formation.
Yeah, agree with that. I've quite often gone there just to get that nerve buff on him if I'm running those units.
Yeah, I think he's just quite versatile for his points. Fast, nimble, scores, inspires for 110 points. That's pretty good value for me. And then the rallying's almost like just a bit of extra. It arguably, with that flexibility that it provides you, arguably does enough even without the rallying to take. And then, particularly if it was, say, a 4th inspiring choice in the list, you can be happy enough to throw him away, if you needed to, depending on how you've constructed your list. I think, it's quite versatile on the list. And I guess this list does have some compared to some lists, less of the scoring inspiring options that some lists have.
True.
Yep, for sure.
And then last up from the non-unique heroes is the Overmaster on Ancient Winged Half-Breed. So our dragon equivalent, speed 10, melee 3, defense 5, unit strength 2, 9 attacks, nerve 17, 19, points 300, crushing 3, fly, fury, inspiring, nimble, regen 5+, vicious melee, abomination dwarf keywords, and your command options. It's still expensive, but good. I think one of the best changes from last Clash was unit strength 2 on Titans.
Yeah. And I think this guy picked up Fury as well, if I'm not wrong, because I swear I used to put a Staying Stone on this guy. Yeah, I quite like him if I'm going for a faster list. I've got a model I like using, and I do like having a dragon in a list if we're playing the bigger, 2,300 point games. So he does often find his way onto the table, but depends on your build. If you've got the points for him, I think he's worth it.
There's not a lot of dragons in the game that have got regen. So even though he's only 9 attacks, regen is big.
Yeah.
On a defense 5, 19 nerve unit with fury. But his attacks are solid. Like, he's crushed 3 just like all dragons, but he's also vicious. So, there's not a lot of things. Maybe defense 6, you're not just going to auto wound, but defense 5, you're auto wounding. So, I think he's very solid.
Would you take 2?
I'm not that kind of guy, maybe. I've definitely faced 2 or 3 in games before, admittedly from Abyssal Dwarves, but for exactly the same reasons. They're a decently pointed dragon. Like they're actually probably better than most at those points. You don't spend those points on the breath weapon or that sort of stuff, so you're getting your regen and so forth instead, which keeps that flying hammer anvil around longer.
And you got so many cheap unlocks if you wanted to go that route, right? If you wanted to try to, you can have still a big wave of nerve in the middle while it's trying to get flanks or whatever.
Yeah, it definitely has a place, and I think it's something that
Paul's like, I wouldn't take 2, but I'd take 3.
Yeah. I definitely think it's a nice option in this list to have, just to give you that source of something that flies and can get out there.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's the only speed 10 option in the list.
Yeah.
Only thing above speed 8.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although the what am I thinking of? The Impalers a little bit faster on the charge with the wild charge, so they can keep up with that dragon just about.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so onto the unique units. We have Golek Skinflayer, who is a chariot version hero. Speed 8, melee 3, defense 5, unit strength 1, 7 attacks, dash 16, 200 points. Crushing 1, dread, nimble, rally 2, slave only, thunderous 2, very inspiring, vicious melee, the command options. I mean, at face value, I think in the context of this list, he almost looks like an auto to me, this guy, with what he brings to the table. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, look, I agree. I would just about run him at those points without the rally 2 for slaves, with the speed, the dread, the -3 on the charge with vicious, and the 7 attacks. Like he's like that sort of little mini flying monster that a lot of armies have. So he does that. Then the rally 2 for slaves is huge, and he's at the same pace of the key hammers that you actually want to be rallying up in the units like the Impalers and the Tunnel Runners. So unfortunately, he just can't be everywhere on the battlefield at the same time.
And I think that's the key to him, is making sure that, you don't send him off by himself too early or something and, lose the rally, because, once he's stuck in and he's disordered, 7 attacks on 3, crush 1 is not great. You've really got to send him in, like you said, with the tunnel runners or something. Get the most value out of him. Make sure he's getting his dread and his rally to right where it needs to be.
Yeah, like you find that support charge from him is enough to get the tunnel runners across the line and remove units in one hit rather than getting stuck. And he's got just the right
for
amount of
sure.
output for that.
Yep, I
Right.
agree.
And then the last unique unit is Kryz's Gore Impaler, which is another hero but monster chariot. Speed 8, melee 3, defense 5. Unit strength 1, attacks d6 plus 7, dash 16, 2, 10 points. Crushing 2, rampage melee d6, vicious melee, wild charge d3, and battering ram, which I did not put the rule for battering ram.
Battering ram lets you overrun through a unit as if it was an individual.
Yes.
A lot of fun.
Right. Yeah. So this is basically your upgraded what's it called? Death Engine.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's Death Engine
It's
that hits on
exactly the
threes
same.
and occasionally overruns.
Yep. Yep.
For 30 points.
I think the key thing about this we didn't talk about earlier was that it's not inspiring. So if you put this thing down for whatever 200, is it 220?
210.
It's not inspiring. So you've got to get inspiring sources in around it.
But Golek will be there, right?
Golek's always standing next to Kryzer in my eyes. I will admit I've stopped putting Kryzer in of late, not because it's not a really good unit and it goes through things. It's I'm actually finding the struggle of reforming after combat if you're sitting next to tunnel runners or Golek trying to turn around those multiple chariots side by side. You've just cleaned up a unit in the back line and now you actually can't face the rest of the army and you'd spend another turn getting back into position.
Yeah. Golek, it reminds me he needs that chant from oh God. What was this soccer Ted Lasso, except for instead of Roy Keane, it's he's there, he's here, he's there, he's everywhere, Golek. Well then let's roll into the formation. So lowest of the low. And again, we come up against one of my most hated things about the companion is the fact is it doesn't directly tell you what you're getting different to the base units. So we've got 2 hordes of slave warriors. No, sorry, a horde of slave warriors, a regiment of slave warriors, 2 regiments of slave warriors, and a taskmaster on chariot. So the taskmaster, sorry, you go.
I was going to say those 3 lots of warriors get the last breath added on. You don't have a choice in there. So that's just part and parcel of formation. That's about all those guys are getting over the normal unit.
Right, okay, and they must be getting it for what, a slight discount, are they?
No, I think you're probably paying full price on it. I think you're paying full price. What you really get out of this is the Taskmaster on Chariot himself.
Okay. Yeah, so he gets a 2-point nerve bump, and he's got the special, and he gets a special rule out of my way slave, which is the auto route friendly slave unit. They're full whack. There's no discount on them. And as Steve said, you have to take the last breath upgrade like it's built in.
That's bizarre to me.
Yeah, so you spend...
That's one of the most bizarre formations.
I think you spend 45 points on the last breath upgrades and then another 35 on the Taskmaster for all of the upgrades. But yeah, that ability to blow up one of your own units to make way for something else to come through, it's an awful lot of fun if you can make it work. But because it's got to be... You've got to do it in his line of sight before he moves, means you've actually got to get your positioning facing the unit you want to blow up the turn before you want to blow it up. So it's actually quite hard to do in practice, and I've definitely built lists around this quite a few times. And yeah, have definitely struggled with that. For me, he's a Taskmaster that's 13, 15 nerve, as Paul talked about earlier. That's sort of the big thing you get. So if you're taking last breath, I think it's worth taking the formation for his nerve bump.
Yeah, it's just really unusual to have a formation that forces you into the options.
Yeah.
I just, I guess it's just probably one of those areas that slaves have lost out a bit.
There is the bit of theme around there. If you've pushed those slaves into a combat there and then you just automatically blow them up to do the D3 wounds and then charge in with something different, you're not stuck in a grind with crappy little guys, but you got a bit of damage out from them. So it kind of makes a bit of fluff sense there, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It sort of forces you down a particular path. Some people just want regiments or just want hordes, and you can't pick and choose. You've got to have a horde and 2 regiments, and you've got to have the last breath. So it is hard. I find I start with the formation and then just take it out. I find it very hard to build around.
What's annoying with this is the crystal pendant doesn't work in the same way in this instance. So the last breath works if they're removed via this rule, but crystal pendant you actually have to be routed in combat, so you can't freely blow up a crystal pendant on these, because that would have been an awful lot of fun.
Okay, well, that does us with the list proper. So we might take a brief break and then we'll be back with the guys giving their sample lists and a bit of a discussion of the army overall in a competitive environment.
I'm Steve Hilder, and you're listening to Countercharge.
And welcome back. And so we might just briefly touch on, how do you guys think this list overall plays best in a competitive environment? Just in terms of, I guess, maybe from a style of build perspective, that may or may not be your particular style. But Steve, maybe let's start with you.
Look, I think it's probably something that you are trying to embrace a bit of that shooting. I like the sort of the mixed arms look with it, where you're either running 1 or 2 fast flanks with an infantry corps in the middle there, ideally with a bit of shooting to push it through there. There's definitely different ways you can take the list, but I think you probably get the most from it by maximizing some of those fast units like the half breeds and tunnel runners with key items on them. And then pushing through the center with some more solid blocks and a bunch of chaff in the form of slaves.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the problems I always find when I build a list is I don't have enough shooting. But I think I agree that combined arms with a bit of shooting and a bit of threat projection and a little bit of chaff is the best way to build the list, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And do you think there's any particular weaknesses with the list? Like, what would you say it really hates to see across the table?
Other armies.
Yeah, it really loves blank space.
Yeah.
No. It definitely doesn't like shooting lists. I don't think the likes of elves and stuff have definitely destroyed me more than some of the combat lists that want to come and hit you. So if anyone can hold outside of that lovely decimator shooting range and pick you apart, that's definitely what I don't want to see.
It's also it's mostly defense 4, and I don't think there's any native strider, so terrain isn't great either.
True.
And likewise in snare, so trident realms and those sort of armies are going to give it a bit of grief, especially like the frogs that shoot and are in snare. Like that's a bit of a nightmare matchup. Because it's it is low defense and it's just about all melee 4 or 5, so those armies definitely suffer against ensnare.
Yeah, even your hits on 3s units are susceptible to that shooting, so you sort of can't get your hammers in there against the shooting, and then the things that make it are hitting on 5s and hoping to hit something.
Yeah, and I think the real problem with shooting is you haven't really got great mitigation for it, do you?
No.
Other than not easy and cheap mitigation of some army-wide stealthy or something,
Yeah. As Paul said, there's not enough
limited
terrain mitigation. Your boots are striding's on something, and that's the one thing hiding in the terrain.
And then, do you think there's better and worse scenarios for the list as a whole? I mean, my point of view with this question is it probably very much depends on your build, but what do you think there?
I think you nailed it. It depends on your build. If you've got a lot of unit strength, then control, dominate, those sort of missions you're going to do pretty well. But I think if you tend to build with sort of 12 or so scoring units, you probably do okay in most scenarios. You want to have something fast or a couple of fast elements, something that's at least speed 8 to make sure you can get to where you need to be. But the units being the slave units being native movement 6 is quite handy because it means you can get to loot tokens and stuff in your first turn. So I don't think it plays missions particularly well or badly.
Yeah, there's none that I don't want to play with this army. I think it's good across pretty much all of them. I will admit my decimators quite like it if we're playing dominate because I know where to deploy them. But outside of that, I think whatever comes up on the table, they're pretty happy to play.
All right. Well, we might roll into your list. Who are we going to get to go first? Paul, let's go with you first. Let's.
Okay.
Do you want to run us through your list?
Yeah,
and then
sure.
Maybe a bit of like how you believe it would play well and work together.
Okay, so I've gone for a very subtle list. It starts with 4 hordes of slave warriors, all with the last breath. So I wanted to sort of make a list that had a wave of troops, like I said earlier, that your opponent has to deal with. So I figure 4 hordes is probably going to stand up to most shooting. And they've got the last breath, so they're going to cause a bit of pain when they die. I've then got 2 regiments of abyssal half-breeds that are just naked, and 2 tunnel runner units, one with the blood of the old king and one with brew of sharpness. So those 4 units are sort of heavy hitters, and I would deploy them a little bit back behind the slaves with the aim of coming through as a second wave. Hopefully not going to be suffering from any shooting casualties. And being hopefully double charging, so leave them far enough behind to have a bit of a maneuver room, and they should both hit pretty hard with sharpness and blood of the old king, the 2 tunnel runner units. So I've then got a unit of vermintide, which is just a jack of all trades unit. Can be chaff, it can sit on an objective, it can work the flanks, it can be annoying, whatever's required. 2 Catachan rocket launchers. I think these are in the list mainly as scoring units, but obviously they can shoot. So in a mission like Control, I would have them, in the 2 edge quarters or the edge sectors as scoring units and chipping away here and there. I've got an Iron Caster with Fireball 12 and Heal. So he's sort of guarding the middle, being an inspiring source, healing my key units behind, and using Fireball at the end of the game just as a bit of a mop-up. 2 half-breed champions. I wanted them to have Blader slashing and Mesa crushing, but I didn't have enough points. But they're inspiring, they're fast, so they can run with the half-breeds. They can be used as chaff. They can be, sort of second hitters along with one of the hammer units to just, get that extra bit of damage. They can interfere with shooters. And lastly, Golek Skinflayer because he's auto. And I think I would basically have him with just as Steve said, with the 2 tunnel runners, but, early on he would be giving a bit of rally to the slaves until they inevitably die. And then he's going in with the tunnel runners.
Yeah, I don't mind that. Do you think there's a main weakness in that at all?
Yeah, I haven't got Jesse's boots, so there's absolutely no terrain mitigation. I think if there's something that can handle a slave unit quickly, like elves shooting, for example, I think could be a problem. Once that front line disappears, there's sort of not much left of the army.
Yeah, and the problem is, isn't it? You've only really got those 2 hammers. So if one's,
Well, there's
interfered
probably
with by
4.
terrain.
There's 2 half-breeds and 2 tunnel runners, but yeah.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
half-breeds, yeah.
So I think against the shooting army, I would send the half-breed champions up to mess with the shooting line as much as I could, but shooting is definitely like a problem for this list.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does sound like fun just pushing those 4 hordes through and seeing what pokes its head past to hit with the fast unit. So
yeah, it is fun.
I'm not sure how Paul would cope with playing this list, to be honest, because taking repeats of units is just not his thing at all. So I'm just not sure he'd know what to do.
You've got to try new things, Matthew, sometimes.
And do you want to take us through yours, Steve?
Yeah, sure. So I'm running 2 regiments of slave warriors, partially there for unlocks, but they'll also support the decimator horde. I've also got a horde of slave warriors, and they are very much in there to unlock everything I've got, and will probably play on a sort of slow delay side. I've got 2 troops of abyssal berserkers with slave nets. These will probably sit behind the 2 slave warriors and beside the decies to get delivered from there or to play a little bit of cleanup. Importantly, I've got my horde of decimators with Blessing of the Gods. Whole plan is to have them shoot for 4 or 5 turns and hopefully be the scoring unit still left alive at the end. So they're going to be carrying a lot of the work, and a lot of this list is built around making that happen. I've got a horde of slave nightmares, which I've given Sir Jesse's boots of striding, just so that if they are charging, that hits on 4s doesn't go to 5s out of the terrain. And I sort of see this unit as the kind of connecting unit between the decimator formation and the fast flank that I've got. So it'll be interesting to see how these guys go, because it hasn't yet worked for me, but they're back in the list for a try. I've got 2 regiments of Vermintide. So one of those will specifically support in front of the decimators, and the other one is to play chaff for the fast side of the list. Speaking of which, I've got a regiment of tunnel runners with Brew of Sharpness. I've then got 2 Katsuchan rocket launchers. They'll probably sit out on the delay side as well and hopefully chip away. And if someone doesn't come and clean them up, they might be scoring at the end of the game as well. Moving into the characters, I've got 2 Ironcasters, both the same, with Fireball 12 and Banechant 2. So these will sit either side of the decimators and add into the firepower out of there. So a combination of those plus the decimators can remove units in one shot. That was an awful lot of fun at Clash, and part of the reason I killed so many things was just one-shotting hordes with that combination. I've then got an Abyssal half-breed champ with the Mournful Blade to give him Duelist. This guy I plan to put wherever he feels like being and just try and have a whole lot of fun with him and terrorize pieces. We'll see how that goes. I've then got a Taskmaster on Chariot. I gave this guy Pipes of Terror just so that he can add that little extra combat res if he goes in. But primarily he'll be the weak side inspiring source, helping that slave horde out and just trying to delay things a little bit longer. And last and definitely not least is Golek Skinflayer, who's out there on the far side supporting those tunnel runners, and for once standing between them and the slave nightmares to give the rally across both of those units to get to the 16-18 Def 5.
Yeah, so I think compared to Paul's, I guess, goes a bit more for that melee focus where you've got a bit more of that combined shooting, couple of tricks with dueling fireball wizards, and Shattering's made such a difference to the fireball spell, didn't it?
It has. Just, and at Clash we had the command dice in. We haven't talked much on those, but getting that extra 3 inches on that fireball made so much of a difference at Clash for this list.
I think for me, when I look at both those lists, I think what they show is that they do a combined style list pretty well. It's just it's never going to be on the overpowered level, though, is it? You know, it's not. It's the ceiling of the list, I think, is lower in terms of its ultimate power level, but it does a pretty nice balanced list, I reckon.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. There's definitely plenty of pieces to play around with and get something you like the feel out of. It's not going to do some things as well as other armies will do, but it's certainly got that ability to play across all those different phases of the game.
Yeah, and so that brings us on to a question from Nick Brooks, who said, also, it seems like they really only have one very strong build with MMU or with the explosion mechanic, which will devastate melee-focused armies but can easily be countered by shooting. If the faction survives to fourth, how do you think they could solve this playstyle issue? I can't quite tell whether he's saying there's only one strong MMU or one strong build in general. And I mean, personally, I kind of don't agree with it.
Yeah, I'm looking
I
at.
think I'd prefer either of your lists over the list that he's listed there.
Yeah, I'm sort of looking at that list, and I think what he's put there is what people will see at first pass of Ratkin Slaves. You'll see the Last Breath, you'll see the Decimators, and you'll be thinking it's about having your warriors blow up and shooting and cleaning things up. But I think there's a lot more to the list than what I'm seeing in here. It's that kind of list is not what draws me to the army, I think.
Yeah, and I'm not convinced that that's at the top of the power tree for it.
No.
No, I agree. He's got, well, the list looks like it's got seven units of slave warriors, and I don't think they've got the staying power at all. But like Steve said, there's lots of different ways of building a list, and I don't think you have to go down that particular route. You can if you want to. I like these troops of decimators. I think that'd be very interesting. But if you've got a lot of units that are low defense and low nerve, it's just going to crumble very quickly. I think you've got to sort of find the sweet spot between having those low survivability units and having something a bit stronger to keep the army together with, if you want to do well.
Yeah, 100%. And other than the tunnel runners, there's pretty much it mentions kind of, I guess, weakness to shooting, but there are other units, I guess, that could mitigate that a little bit with a little bit higher defense or whatever isn't there, and they're just not in there.
Yeah, I think it's a list that if you've got a bit of a plan of how you're actually planning to use those units in combination with each other, you get a lot more out of it than just, I want a bunch of this, I want a bunch of this, and put it on the table.
All right. Well, do you guys have any closing thoughts on the list or anything you want to say that we don't think that's been covered so far?
I hope they don't get deleted in 4th edition.
You've stolen what I was going to say as well, Paul. I think, it's...
Sorry. I hope they do then.
Someone's always got to be the bottom ranked list amongst there. If you get rid of them, something else becomes the worst list. And there is something fun about running a list that not everyone does and actually getting somewhere with it as well. So, but I think the aesthetic of them looks really good. I think the ranges that are existing are pretty good from Mantic, so I don't see a reason to get rid of it. Maybe there's some tweaks and some more fun to be had with it, but I think it's fine. It's
a good point. Like, you compare that to sort of Riftforged Orcs or something, or Salamanders, there's actually nearly a complete range you can build of Ratkin Slaves. Like, a lot of those earlier Mantic lines just don't have that sort of coverage that Ratkin Slaves have. So I'd say it's close to 100%.
Yeah.
Whereas Riftforged Orcs is probably like 60 or 70%. I think my only thought is, can we call it like Abyssal Dwarf Slaves instead? Because, it feels like the Ratkin are the ones in charge, but that's not what the theory is.
Yeah. The naming convention doesn't quite seem right, does it?
Yeah.
No. And yeah, so like I said at the top of the show, I have no insight into how they're treating lists, but I think there's a chance we might know when we're going to find out in the not too distant future. I want to say thanks to these guys for giving up their time this evening to take us through the Ratkin Slaves list. Very much appreciate it. Feel free to drop a comment on the show if you want to give some feedback. Can't promise to read it, but we'll see. So we hope you enjoyed what is our penultimate army review for third edition. We've only got the ogres left to redo, which will hopefully be coming shortly. So thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep countercharging.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Countercharge. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at counterchargepodcast@gmail.com, on Twitter at countercharge15, or by commenting on the Countercharge Kings of War podcast Facebook group. If you enjoy the show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Until next time, keep countercharging. Music is a composition of Kevin MacLeod and is licensed under Creative Commons.